Hey everyone, thanks for joining me, and today we'll be looking at a streamer, the update to the Arylic S10, the S10 Plus. Let's take a quick look at the unit. On the front of the unit we have a small screen. On top, your transport buttons, input select, volume plus and minus, pause play, and the plus and minus with the long press act as transport forward and back buttons. On the back, the ports, starting with a LAN port, a USB-A port, a line in on 3.5mm, so you can add a turntable, a TV, a CD player. Next to that, your analog line out, also on 3.5mm, followed by your Toslink optical out, and finally a USB-C port. This port can be used to power the unit as well as to make this a desktop DAC to connect to your computer. Although this definitely wouldn't be my main reason for purchasing this device. Now we'll look at some specs and we'll compare the S10 Plus to its closest competition, the WiiM Mini. And there's a lot to talk about because this isn't necessarily a case of which one's better, but more so of if and then. If you need this option, then this works better. The S10 Plus also includes a remote, whereas with the WiiM Mini, one is available for an additional $20. Over its $89 asking price puts you at $109 for this unit compared to the $69 for the S10 Plus with the remote included. Hardware-wise, the most obvious difference on the units themselves is the screen on the S10 Plus. Personally, for me, it isn't very useful. I really just don't use the screen. The screen shows you how the S10 Plus is connected, and it shows you an icon for Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, line in, USB-A, and USB-C, which is its DAC mode. And in one of the companion apps to the S10 Plus that we'll talk about later, you have the option to turn the screen off, which is something that I always love to see. The Mini lacks a screen, but honestly, in the few years that I've owned that unit, I've never found myself wanting one. That may be different for you, and now you have an option. As I stated earlier, the S10 Plus also has that Ethernet port, so you can hardwire a connection for internet to this unit, or you can jump on Wi-Fi on a 2.4 GHz network. The Mini is Wi-Fi only, but you get two bands. You can jump on a 2.4 gig network or a 5 gig network. I personally prefer to have these units on the 2.4 GHz network with the rest of my IoT devices in the house, and I set my TVs in the house on the 5 GHz network, and finally my main streamer and all the computers in the house on wired Ethernet connections. I find that wired is definitely the way to go, especially if you're running ROON on a remote server somewhere else in the house. If I were to use the S10 Plus in my main system, I definitely want it on the Ethernet port and hardwired. Both the S10 Plus and the Mini have Bluetooth, the S10 Plus having Bluetooth 5.0 and receive only, whereas the Mini has Bluetooth 5.2 and has receive and transmit. Although I can't quite conceptualize why I'd want to transmit from the WiiM instead of directly from my phone, but maybe you guys have some use scenarios. If I'm shooting over to some headphones, I think I'd just go straight from my phone to the headphones. So maybe I'm missing something. I'd love to know. Both the S10 Plus and the Mini use standard codecs, SBC and AAC. Neither use aptX or LDAC. As for their output resolution, the Mini outputs at up to 24-bit 192 kHz on both the analog out and the digital out. And on the Mini, you do have to select which output you want to use. On the S10 Plus, the internal DACs analog out gives you CD quality 16-bit 44.1 kHz, and again up to 24-bit 192 on the optical out. But don't let those numbers be what makes you choose between these two. The truth is that 16-bit 44.1 is really all you need out of either of these. The differences between high-res and CD quality is extremely difficult to perceive on entry-level DACs, and these units are no exception. If you really want to hear that difference, you'll want to go optical out of these into a superior DAC, and there you will hear the differences. And at that point, you're getting the same signal, up to 24-bit 192. Basically the limitations of the Toslink optical cable. One awesome feature of the S10 Plus though, is that analog out and the digital out are active at the same time, which could be useful for some users. The S10 Plus supports Spotify Connect, whereas the Mini supports Spotify Connect and Tidal Connect. Now you can still hear Tidal on the S10 Plus, you just have to send that data through the app or through AirPlay. And we'll speak about AirPlay in a moment. Neither of these are ROON ready, and they do not support ROON natively, but again, you can stream from ROON over to these via AirPlay. So speaking about AirPlay, the Mini supports AirPlay 2, which is going to give you better battery life on your phone or your tablet, although at times you're going to get a lossy transmission. And that's definitely going to negate the differences of the output resolution. The S10 Plus, on the other hand, uses AirPlay 1, which while uses more battery on your device, is going to send that file over lossless, so you will be able to output at full CD quality. Now if you're transmitting that AirPlay over from your computer, you don't necessarily have to worry about the battery dying on your phone. Although with my iPad, I've gone the whole day streaming from AirPlay and I've never had a battery issue. I would suggest, as John Darko has taught us, that the AirPlay 2 protocol is great for sending devices, But if you want to receive the best data on your receiving devices, AirPlay 1 is still the way to go. At least if you're concerned about quality. If you have an older iPhone and your battery's starting to go, well yeah, AirPlay 2 might be your friend there. And one last thing about hardware before we switch over to software. LinkPlay, WiiM's parent company, manufactures a streaming module in both the S10 Plus as well as all the WiiM products and a few other devices. They even have a DIY streaming board over on Parts Express that you can add on to your own project. And one benefit of going with the WiiM products is that LinkPlay sends the WiiM products constant firmware updates, adding some awesome new features. Whereas you get a much more basic firmware on the S10 Plus or those DIY boards. I remember the first feature update on the WiiM to give me Title Connect. I love that, and I love the fact that they started adding those EQ features as well. Although the processor in this unit isn't very strong, so the EQ does make the sound quality on the WiiM Mini go down quite a bit. And I think it's much better on the higher end WiiM products. So on to the apps. The Mini uses the WiiM Home app, whereas the S10 Plus uses a more stripped down 4-stream app, where you won't find a 10-band EQ. But Arylic has found a workaround, and that's in the form of a second companion app, and that's the Go Control app. It is a little annoying having to jump from one app to another to make changes like EQ, but it's one of those things where you tune it to your preference and you forget it. And in the Go Control app, that's also where you find the feature to turn off the screen LED lights. The Go Control gives you your basic tone controls, as well as preset EQs, and the ability to save your own custom 8-band EQ setting. When you launch either the 4-stream app or the WiiM Home app, you'll be able to see each other's hardware. But again, that EQ feature will only pop up on the WiiM Home app. If you go into the 4-stream app, you'll see the WiiM and you'll be able to send music to it, you'll be able to group them, you'll be able to control their volumes, but you won't find the EQ app. Now in the Go Control app, you'll find the Mini, but you won't be able to connect to it. You'll only be able to connect to the Arylic products. On both the WiiM Home and the 4-stream app, you have access to all their streaming services, and each has those 18 same streaming services. The box might just show you a few, but you have a ton in the apps. After all that, there's still more to talk about. How do the internal DACs line level analog out compare? I tested this with 3.5mm outs to RCA cables from the S10 Plus, the Mini, and for my 3.5mm analog out on my Fire TV, into the Doak L3 RCA switcher, and over to a Fosse ZA3 power amp. And I send these the same signal simultaneously via AirPlay. Switching back and forth between all three, what I can tell you is the WiiM Mini had the best soundstage. It was slightly larger and deeper than the other two. But the imaging wasn't great. It was pretty broad. The S10 Plus reversed that. The soundstage wasn't as wide or as deep, however the imaging was much better. The focus on lead vocals was right in front of you, whereas on the Mini it was kind of spread all over the place. Now the output of the Fire TV was the worst of both worlds. You lost the soundstage width as well as depth, everything was much flatter, you lost any layering, and the sound was just slightly more congested. The TV output did have the best bass though. And the reason I added the TV's output to this comparison was to make a point. The DACs in either the S10 or the Mini aren't very impressive. They're slightly better than what you get out of your TV. You get much better sound quality connecting the optical out on either of these over to a separate DAC, like the SMSL SU1 or the Topping D50 Mark III, which I did as well, which at that point, these guys sounded identical. So either would work much better as streaming endpoints as opposed to DACs. So which one do you choose? Here's where we go back to that if and then statement I made at the beginning of the video. And these are just my opinions and suggestions for a few scenarios. I'm sure there's a ton other scenarios that I can't get to, but here's what I have for you. If you have an AV or stereo receiver that has a spare optical in, if you have a digital amplifier, something like the SMSL 8200, if you have a higher end DAC and just want to add streaming to that, either of these would be a great option. If you're streaming from an iPad or iPhone via AirPlay, the S10 Plus wins here with its ability to receive an AirPlay 1 and keep those signals lossless. If you're a Tidal user, the Mini is much more appealing with its Tidal Connect support. I would much rather just stay in the Tidal app to send music over when I'm not using ROON. If you have issues with your Wi-Fi connections, if you're in a very congested city with a lot of interference and you need a hardwired connection, then the S10 Plus is a no-brainer and fixes that problem. And finally, if you just want to get the best bang for your buck and you're a Spotify or Amazon Music user, the S10 Plus at $69 including the remote control versus $109 for the WiiM Mini with the remote control is a no-brainer win for the S10 Plus. In that scenario, this guy right here is the value king currently. And that's all I have for you today. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.